afraid this either is time for you to stop talking or to remove yourself from the building. So I hope it's okay with all. Glad to see you all. Hey, Rick. One of these days, somebody is going to design a better way to see people on the screen. I'm just going to see if I can change the number of people I'm seeing. See more people. I like to see people. So there you go. Welcome everyone to the System 3 seminar, episode number 2. Christopher, be careful where you're driving. I'm going to trust that you are in control of the vehicle and everything is safe there. But glad to see you all join. Some of the folks who've been from last time, glad to see you back. Some new folks, happy to have you join this time. Just a couple of housekeeping things up front. One, as I sort of telegraphed to those of you who were around last week, going to be doing these things on a regular basis. So I think the cadence is going to be once a month, and I will try to keep them sort of same day and time for predictability. So that's first part. I think I said this in the invitation, or at least in email to some folks. For the foreseeable future, I think AI and intelligence, insofar as they're part of what led to my thinking about System 3 in the first place, and is a pretty deep and wide topic, will be a topic for forthcoming seminars. So different flavor and spin on those as we go, but and please, if that starts to feel like too much, love to hear that, and love to hear shut up about AI, let's talk about something else. That said, there's plenty to talk about, and part of my hope for this conversation and future ones is to have some conversation about the things that we're not getting, daily in our LinkedIn feeds and various other sources of AI, news, propaganda, hype, etc. And a chance to talk about the things that perhaps aren't getting enough attention in the mainstream conversation. And that's probably a good way to start to frame up the first part of this conversation, which is about what I take to be the two dominant AI narratives out there, which I've characterized as the utopian narrative and the apocalyptic narrative. And for those that haven't got a chance, I did circulate a Google Doc, and I will share it in the chat for those who missed it. I will be also, this is partly why I added folks to a Google invite so that I could share Google Docs ahead of our meetings, just to give people some read ahead material, which people are free also to make contributions to, just a way to keep building on the conversation that we're having. So I'm just going to add that link in the chat. But fundamentally, here's how I would characterize these two narratives, right? I mean, for what's not completely straightforward. In the best sense, I think, I tried to do this in the Google Doc. In the best sense, each of these narratives, means to capture something that probably is worth paying attention to. The utopian narrative is fundamentally optimistic in its orientation, although we can talk about how it develops or gathers steam. But fundamentally, the utopian narrative is that what is coming, what is emerging, what has arrived, depending on your perspective on our place in the play, is fundamentally a good thing, fundamentally a progressive thing, fundamentally a thing that will add to forms of human flourishing, and improve our lives on the planet. The apocalyptic narrative, is fundamentally, in its best case, a cautionary one that worries that we're developing technology that is powerful and dangerous in ways in which we both have some sense of, but perhaps underappreciate, and that may in some extreme case become some kind of existential threat. And the nature of those existential threats vary from our inability to control this thing and its horrible unintended consequences, to the fact that it actually turns into something conscious and malevolent, or what may be just as good for some apocalyptic folk. Not that it means us harm, but simply doesn't care about us, and has developed a program of its own that doesn't include us. So those seem to me, the dominant views that we're hearing. I think the utopian view, surprise, surprise, is often present among people who are building this kind of technology, and think we all should be excited and welcoming of it. And the apocalyptic vision, not always by people who are anti-technology or even anti an AI future, but who worry about aspects of its development, or its current trajectories of development, and think that we should worry too. So the first thing that I wanted to do is sort of put out to bid a question, which is, do you think that either of these narratives are in any way understated? I mean, like, I've sort of characterized them, in their best light as optimistic and cautionary. Obviously, there are extreme versions of both. But in terms of what you're paying attention to out there in the discourse, do you think that there are ways in which people aren't sort of emphasizing either of these narratives enough, or that they're not being stated strongly enough? Thoughts?
This is Daniel speaking. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Daniel.
I think there's perhaps a third narrative that inches more towards the being realistic about the fact that we don't know. There's sort of this agnosticism around just how mysterious some of the effects and consequences of AI are, given what we've seen. And so I think it doesn't stand either on cautionary or utopian.
Right.
It rather sort of is at the edge of the mystery, kind of ready to tilt it in one way or the other.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think there's also, this is Rick, by the way. Hi, everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces, and I'm really glad to see all the other ones too. I wonder if the government level regulation that we're seeing kind of cropping up in Europe now, with a bunch of countries kind of banning it and others are asking about OpenAI's data policies, and the GDPR kind of may actually come to the rescue to slow things down a bit. I wonder if there's a government level lens that you could put on it where, on the one hand, there's that kind of like, slow down, we don't know what's going on. Like, if you're not going to obey the policy that we've already put in place, you can't play here. On the one side, and on the other side, you've got like regimes of power that are using it for really nefarious control purposes, right?
Yep.
Which I don't think either of them are really described in the two scenarios that you were playing out.
Yeah, fair. And for sure, I think we're at the very beginning of the regulatory conversation. Obviously, the EU, the United States have both sort of started to weigh in, but have been. In a way, like to your point, the EU's policies, so far and moves in the direction of policy and regulation have been building on the foundation of data rights and data regulation sort of regimes that exist. The U.S. I think has been slower, and not exactly laissez-faire, but let's wait and see a little bit. But for sure, I think and maybe these narratives, maybe the posture in policy making sits in this more agnostic space that Daniel is describing. Although I think European signals seem to be biased to something more cautionary. But yeah, I think.
Michael, can I jump in a little bit?
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
There are three elements that I would like to. Just recently, I think I said this in the last meeting. I'm now the consultant working with Peel Regional Police here in Canada on AI and creating a statement of principle around the use of AI and new technology in policing. And what Daniel was saying, I do feel like we're not in the thinking mode for most people. We're in the feeling mode. We've emoted emotions around AI without knowing. And I believe last week I was in Ottawa dealing with a conference. There were two conferences. One was on the international conference around liberalism. And I basically stood up and said that the Leviathan is dead. So around the idea around regulations, okay, we can regulate, but it's not just our governments that are able to use this technology. Many people who can develop algorithms and technologies that are not within that space and can actually avoid the regulations because their technology and their means is better. So there's that narrative around still thinking that the government holds the same amount of power in this space. I'm just going to throw that out there. And then the other piece is the difference between training data and instant data. So the data that we put in to create algorithms is one thing, then we might be able to shape more intentionally. When I think about cars that are able to do environmental mapping and speak to each other, who owns that data? And it's instantaneously being created. So that is a different narrative than the data that is actually training data that formulates many of the algorithms that we want within institutions. Some of these environmental mapping and what I call instant data creation that's another set of data sets that create algorithms that I think we need to be very mindful when we're talking about AI. So I'm still believing that we have almost like our economy, to very extremes. We've headed into a world where a lot of people don't know much about AI, and we're responding almost on a guttural level, a feeling level that's being emoted through social media and media. And then there's a few people who are that know the technology very well, and even beyond our governments and those who are trying to regulate it. I mean, I don't know if any one of you guys saw some of the Senate discussions bringing people, and you can just tell that the government's reps just did not know what they're talking about, right? They're like, you're talking about phones and toilet paper almost, like they just did not know. So how are they going to? This is what's leading me to believe that the Leviathan is dead when it comes to these issues. So I just wanted to put that out there to kind of.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. One of the things that I think is an important dynamic in what you're describing, and certainly something that I think a lot about, and you know, I think is a kind of a background condition to the technological reality that we're already living in, which is that more and more our uses, or being, you know, enmeshed in technology environments, both sensing environments and software environments, where our use of those things is non-elective, which is to say that in the course of doing normal things, we are enmeshed in software systems and networked sensing systems that, you know, like if we're paying attention, we're aware, but like, you know, when you go in through a turnstile in a public transit system, right? There's an example of a way in which, in a small way, you know, we're being metered, right? And you know, we don't consent in a conscious or deliberate way to being part of a system there, except, you know, insofar as it's necessary to get on the subway. And there's certainly many other examples. Yeah, Daniel, you have something.
Yeah, so I've been going back and forth on whether I feel like the dystopia, you know, the apocalypse versus utopia narratives are harmful or helpful. And I've been thinking about it a lot. In futures practice, you tend to do these very polarized approaches and have people really commit to a, you know, we're doing an apocalypse right now. We're going to imagine that the worst possible things happen,
Yeah.
and we're going to frame things in that way, right?
Yeah.
And that's it in many ways. So this kind of draws from Langdon Winner's theory of technological somnambulism, which is that we sleepwalk into technologies. And what you just said reminds me of a lot of what I'm learning from Johan Hari's book, which is called Stolen Focus. And he's basically framing something that is already happening in the present, that has already happened to us. We are already victims to these technologies that have been around, you know, social media, the endless scroll. That there's a lot, you know, our smartphones basically, and the degree to which our lives and the systems that we occupy are entangled with them. And we are already being victimized and harmed by it. But in many ways, we're asleep to those facts. And so our awareness of those relies on us adopting, accepting, because the value judgments are social constructs, right? And this is one reason why I love one of my favorite names for a subreddit is called a boring dystopia. And it's a subreddit that basically describes how capitalism is destroying all of us without us being aware of it, right? And it's just examples of how every day, you know, capitalism is hacking our minds and our social systems in order to make us less happy without us being aware of it. That's what makes it boring, right? I have this problem with academic approaches to things in their endless caveats, because they are so obsessed with being correct that they refuse to say anything at all, right? Find all of the examples in which this is not the case, and if that's a majority of the paper, then the thing that you're trying to say is the case barely makes it through, right? So, and this is why I think the tempered and pragmatic and and like less extremes. This is one reason I like seeing folks like Ted Chiang speaking out on this, is because I think that science fiction authors are uniquely suited to help us reframe the present in ways that help us, you know, construct more useful and beneficial values around these things, whether or not that is the most accurate objective description of those things. the things that really affect us and cause us to take action could be described as fictions, right? The American Revolution could have been described as being based on a fiction, in the fact that a lot of the propaganda that was generated to drum up support could have been disputed, right? But those fictions were useful.
Yeah, yeah, appreciate all that. King Shook?
Yeah, I love the idea of useful fictions, by the way. And just building on what Daniel, Claudia, and Rick just mentioned, I think one framing that I find useful in attacking the dichotomy that you started with, Michael, was separating what AI does from the human response to it, right? So there are people who are worrying about the paperclip problem, so to speak, right, of AI's own incentives doing things that will be negative for humans by itself, right? But just like Daniel said, with folks like Ted Chiang and Ezra Klein and others, at least in the mainstream media, have kind of shone a light on the fact that our incentives with capitalism, with market economies, etc., are aligned in a way that causes us to act in very weird ways because of the ways our incentives are lined up, right? Further commodification of human talent and creativity, for example, just to mention one example, right? And our penchant to drive costs down means that in a kind of boring dystopia kind of way, it's not so much how clever AI is going to be and how it's going to take over, as much as what are we incentivized to do in our economy, and how are we going to use it in very likely ways, which doesn't require us to be rocket scientists to kind of predict, right? So that is kind of a framing that I find kind of interesting. Just maybe it makes the 2x2 a 4x4 from dystopia versus utopia on one axis, and human responses versus tech agency on the other side. But one quick comment, because Rick's comment reminded me of this. I'm sitting here in the Bay Area where there's it's the center of what they call the EAC movement, right? The effective accelerationists, right? And it's almost like a religious cult right now. And part of their argument is that you cannot possibly regulate it effectively, so you might as well accelerate. And it's using the kinds of things that Rick was talking about, which is, hey, we can regulate, but China won't. So in order to compete with China, we have to accelerate, right? So it's this kind of circular logic. So I just wanted to throw it out there, just as more seeds for the discussion in case.
Yeah, no. Appreciate all that. And Curtis, going to come to you in just one sec. One of the things that people have made glancing references to, and I just want to sort of note these things as signposts for us to come back to, is at least the stories, right, are that, AI will be ubiquitous, that its pervasive influence and embeddedness is inevitable. Certainly one of the things, was very much in what Claudia said, and it's certainly something I want to scratch on as we go on. We're confronted with this sort of growing incomprehensibility, which we could chop up that incomprehensibility in a bunch of ways. But let's put a pin in that, come to Curtis, and then I'll bring us back around to some of that. Hey, Curtis.
Hey. Hello from sunny Orlando, Florida. I want to just call attention to something I think we're also dancing around, and it's the kind of basic asymmetry here between us consumers. Michael, you referred to going through the turnstile, and we're kind of blithely unaware data is being collected. And I read an article today about the not failure, but not exactly hasn't taken off with success. Amazon's the Just Walk Out, their cashierless system. And the information did a really deep takedown on it, interviews of people that worked on that system. And I had no idea how much video data collected in those systems. And 0.001% of the people that are going in for the convenience of just grabbing stuff off a shelf and walking out of the store without opening your wallet, have any clue that there are, gigabytes of video being collected. And it turns out hundreds of people in India who are watching these videos and labeling you, Daniel Halter, not his name, but, literally saying person grabbing thing off shelf.
Right.
And there's just such a gigantic asymmetry between those who have trained this data. They know exactly what it's been trained on, and the rest of the people who have no idea. And so a basic start to me of regulation is labeling. The AI you're using has been trained on the following data sets. I would love to know that for starts. Just give me some information about where this stuff got trained and how did you even build this thing? I think the black box part of this is really bothering me as a consumer, on a lot of levels. I really want the black box. If it can't be completely white, but there's got to be something. If it's this pervasive and this ubiquitous, there's got to be a way to shine a little bit of light into this black box.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. I mean, something I will say about that, not disagreeing with you, Curtis, but one of the things that's popped up, like literally popped up for all of us in the last couple of years, which is the result primarily of regulation and intervention in Europe, is constant cookie notification. Now, like every time I see it, I realize, right, that the intent is to create awareness of some kind, right, and so on and so on. It's incredibly annoying, however, right, and it happens all the time. And at a certain point, like all other kinds of intervention, terms of this used to be true of terms of service agreements, right? They become so intrusive, and Kingship made a point about you didn't use the words reducing and eliminating friction, but convenience has become convenience of a certain kind, right, has become so it feels so good. I mean, I still marvel, right, at one of the things that I consider to be like the fundamental innovation of Uber, right, which is the ability to finish a car ride that you're paying for and walk out the door without touching your wallet. And Curtis, your example of the Amazon thing, walking out of the store, again, without having to do, like, without the stress, the bother of the mechanics of the transaction. And it would seem, right, that the pleasure that we get in that kind of elimination of friction is sufficient to have us like become really uninquisitive about what all else is going on, right? And so more to say about that. Chris Dalton, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I'm loving the conversation. I think one dynamic that I haven't heard mentioned that I think might be worthwhile introducing is developmental versus singularity, right? And I can hear it kind of playing out a little bit in the conversation without necessarily being labeled. So I thought that might be worthwhile. I think it's pretty clear, but for a conversational sense, the developmental being more the people who see, okay, we're going to be sort of in control of this as we go. We're going to be planning this out. We're going to be kind of one step ahead of this. The singularity, they're like, well, bring on the black box. The bigger the black box, the better, in a way, because that's what's going to actually create this, evolutionary, true artificial intelligence, brought together by the various sort of causes and conditions within a truly kind of, how do you say it, sort of almost like a mimicked kind of ecosystem, right? So it's not really a true ecosystem, you might say, but because of the complexity times the degree of basically praxis and theory that we can bring to it, it creates a whole obvious sort of new sort of way, basically, of being in the world together with technology.
Yeah.
And I think that's I think that all of these sort of perspectives have to be valued and sort of cultivated and let be in a way to come together over time in the actual present, the circumstances that arise as they arise, so that we're not necessarily sort of pinpointing AI or our own perspectives or our collective perspectives in a way that fundamentally limits us in terms of, being able to really deal with, I think, a lot of the conflicts that we can already see are sort of, brewing just in this conversation, just by virtue of this conversation alone, between those that would control it and basically try to control others thereby, and others who would set it free for who knows what result, and then everybody in between, so to speak. So anyway, I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Chris. One of the things that you sort of, I think, bring me around to anyway, and I sort of collect all the inputs that people have made so far, and perhaps hear some thoughts from folks who haven't spoken yet. But it part of what it raises for me, certainly I've been thinking a lot about this, is what is it that we think we need to know, and how are we going to come to know it, and for that matter, who's we in that sentence. But again, there's everybody on the call, I'm sure, is familiar with calls that some have made, that AI should be understandable, right? And that we should have regimes of disclosure, which, at least in principle, make it possible to understand how AI is producing certain kinds of results. Now, I've thought about that, and I think that seems pretty naive in some way, right? Just knowing, just as a functional matter, how software operates and produces results, without us getting into the operations of complex deep layered neural nets. Seeing what's going on, right? Disclosing what's going on poses real practical problems. Any technology that is developing emergent operations and behavior, now we've got that set of complications. And it's not clear that what we think we would get to know if we knew those things is actually, what we care about knowing. And so, just curious what people think, as again, we're sitting in the deluge of information and conversation about this stuff. Like, what do you think, is how do we get to the literacy that we believe that people ought to have? I mean, certainly I've been thinking, for example, about this in the context of the problem of regulation, right? We are about to have a deluge of activity around regulation in every jurisdiction at all kinds of scales of government, right? How are they going to inform themselves? How are they going to come to understand what they need to understand? So thoughts about things we need to know, how we create understanding, and whether you're seeing examples of things that are actually helpful, for starting with ordinary intelligent people, helping people become more more literate.
Well, I might jump in here.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody from Chicago. Nice to see everyone. I don't know if I'm going to answer any of these questions, but and my thinking's very fragmented. But I'll start with your original question: utopia or dystopia. My answer was going to be they are both overstated.
Yep.
And the reality will be much more banal and worse. And what I mean by that is, if you look at anything that's any technology, and I think, you know, people bringing up the notion of what capitalism is doing to us, it all drives towards people making money, and what is making money today is attention and influence, and also what is accreting power is influence. And so I think the biggest fear of AI, and a lot of people have it right, which is it's the scaled version of what happened in our last elections, what social media has done, the ability to influence when you have money and power, populations is an extreme threat, right? But my point is, we haven't been able to get our heads around TikTok and Facebook.
Mhm.
And we allow political advertising and Facebook. So you can just pay for and say whatever you want. It can be complete lies, and you can do it at scale and target it. So we haven't even dealt with social media, let alone AI. And so my proposal, or maybe how I bring this together, is that everybody's focused on AI, but maybe the real focus should be on how we want to live,
Mm.
and what are the I don't know what the term is, you know, the heuristics for this kind of society we want to live in. And you create those conditions that apply to anything, and then the world gets better regardless of what the technology can do. What do I mean by that? Well, we might start considering that we might have hit peak scale and realized, and this is maybe it's AI's benefit, is everybody's realizing, holy, this is the biggest question we've all dealt with, and it's on everybody's consciousness, that maybe scale is not a good thing to shoot for. Whereas it's been 50 years, go big or go home, scale everything, consolidate industries. That's combined with, you know, capitalism. So this efficiency, and maybe we decide we don't want that, and we start having capitalism as if people mattered, economics and stuff as people mattered. And we start questioning our values about how we want to live, rather than trying to regulate specific technologies with rules that are always gotten around anyway. So maybe I'll stop there, but it's just, I feel like it also affords us a chance to ask, I mean, imagine if nobody could be as big as Amazon or Facebook, and they have to break up. They have to do business separately in different states and countries. And you can't scale things to that degree because it's too harmful.
Yeah.
It's fine to have lots of little AIs that are operating in communities around the world, but not big ones that influence everybody.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I like all that, Chris. Thank you. Claudia.
Chris, thanks for that. And I love Chicago, by the way. The Chris brings up a lot of issues that I've been playing with. Values are conflicted within the individual. Like, people like equality until they know that maybe their privilege might be degraded, right? And so, you know, that idea of universality that you're looking for will be played out, and it's going to be the art of politics where people will fight it out. One of the interesting things, the economies that I've been realizing with AI, is that while we think of it as a futuristic thing in the general population, I think it's a historical thing. A lot of the data is the past. It's like streaming in schools. You know, you're getting streamed on the past. And I'm looking at data in policing that was based on biases that we can actually end up fixing in the future, and not calling it. You don't even have to be racist now. The data will lead you to that if you don't scrub the data that was born out of biases. And so in a way, we have to become data historians with that viewpoint of whether or not, you know, what kind of world we want to live in. So we have the economic piece, but we also have the social marginalization piece. And I think all of us know of that story where, you know, there was some test done, and I think was it Twitter, and in a couple of hours, it became like a Nazi in a second, right? Because the dominant voices and the dominant responses that people get, that's also monetized. So I want to put that. And then the other area that I would like to think about is, I think Rick and a few of you mentioned before, and I will play with this piece a lot around the Leviathan. It's one thing to look at our nation state, but our freedoms are also based about how strong our security is, you know. And if someone else from another country could take us over, all the talk around freedoms could go away. So do you want to break up you know, the traditional concept of fascist, meaning that the state and the corporations are actually intertwined? I think we've passed that state, right? There's no distinction. And so so if we've hit that state, and we have many states that have hit that state, does that serves our interests to weaken our state or weaken our Leviathan?
Yeah. Oh boy, pointy question. I appreciate that. I mean, I think, you know, the thing that I'm really sort of excited about in the conversation is, you know, that the future of the political, both big P and little p, right? Claudia, you're talking about Leviathan, and Chris, you know, how we want to live, right? And obviously those things can and are intertwined in both our past and our present. See you later, Lindsay. I think, you know, again, for sure, you know, how things are going to play out at both of those levels, right, are part of what's at stake, right, in this conversation. And so I think, you know, for me, you know, in one way, right, and somebody made this point, you know, AI as an object is kind of distracting. For one thing, it's not an object, it's not simple. But also, you know, why we care about and how we care about it and what we worry about around it, right? I think, you know, gets into all of these other places, from, you know, what we believe, how we want to live, how we can live, you know, in places where we, on the one hand, have to live together, and on the other hand, you know, don't always have the autonomy and power we want to describe the terms on which we live together. So much more to think about and talk about in that space. Rick, you had something.
I had something, but now I have other things.
Okay. Well, you
thank
have
you.
the mic, so.
This is great. No, I think that there's some really great pieces floating around here. I'm working with Amarillo, Texas, of all places, and you asked about how do we get more literate. And I think that we have to work on so many levels there. People don't understand email or how Wi-Fi works. So there's some fundamental like fluency that has to be built there just from the ground up. Anyway, like my mom couldn't get on her email yesterday because she was pushing on the wrong icon. Like, it's kind of funny, but it was a really easy fix, luckily. But I think that there's also how can we design ways to teach people that are actually empowering, like what Chris is saying. Like, so for example, in Amarillo, we decided to hire 6 interns from a set of refugee populations, because they have an awful lot of different populations there that speak lots of languages. They have lots of different cultures, and all of a sudden you have this technology that's influencing the way cultures are kind of playing out, and it's not going to be smooth, right? So how do you actually penetrate those cultures in a sensitive enough way in order to kind of make progress? Because the top-down approach obviously hasn't worked forever. And so they're experimenting with, like, how do we actually experiment on how to learn this stuff? It's not going to be easy, and it's going to be lumpy. But I think those are the foundational underpinnings of entrepreneurship in the 21st century. So they also have found out that the most violent crime in their city is from 18 to 23-year-olds. I think, as Claudia was probably working on, like, how do you reverse that trend and create ways to avoid it in the first place by giving them something else to do and to have other opportunities to kind of play out in the dramas of life, right? So I think there's some really fundamental things that we can do to to design our way out of this problem, not just about AI, but like what Chris is saying, is how do we want to live?
Yeah, Daniel. Thank you, Rick.
Yeah, I like that you brought up design. One, because this is central to the question of like design philosophy. And one thing that I've noticed is that design as a practice, I believe, UX design and the design of artifacts has moved to being in service of these bigger players, right, within the economy, in a way that abstracts away the experience of, like, the embodied experience that you have to travel through in order to generate something. And so you get function, which is outcome, without having to have experience in the generation of the outcome, which AI is just the ultimate embodiment of. And it's brought to, like, as a writer, when I see people using large language models to compose things, I'm like, no, but that's not you. Yeah, you ended up with an outcome, but you didn't go through the experience to generate it, right? And so one thing that I've wondered, and you've seen a little bit of this backlash in how this trend has continued in the last couple of decades, that people are realizing that the experience of life isn't just eating. There's the act of cooking is an experience of life, right? So the hyper focus on outcome over creation or process or embodied practice has led us to this place of sort of meaninglessness. It could be conceived as part of the meaning crisis and Vervaeke and all of that, but it's this shift of the way that we think about the goal of design in the first place, to not necessarily just make outcomes easier to obtain, and rather to make whatever happens feel, be meaningful. And that can include lengthening and increasingly embodying the process of that creation. I know it's a little tangled.
Yeah, appreciate that, Chris. Daniel, the thing I just want to connect to that thought is, back to convenience, and the reduction of certain kinds of friction and shortening the distance between problem experienced and outcome desired, right? The idea of removing effort from certain kinds of work, it's an old idea, right? I mean, it's at the heart of all conceptions of technology, of any kind of technology. New technologies, if they don't remove effort from labor, change the nature of effort, work, and labor, and sometimes outcomes. To the point that you're making, sometimes we're inclined to think that the outcome is the work we're aiming at, as opposed to the effort of doing the work, and that may be, to your point, that may be at the very least, that may be missing something, right? And the question again that comes up for me is, how are we going to? I mean, I think there are sort of at least two levels in which I'm thinking about this in this conversation. The content of what we talk about. How are we going to get from the chatter about ChatGPT and large language models, and all of the sort of things that minutia that we can get caught up in, and end up talking instead, or at least as well as things like what Chris pointed out, thinking about how we want to end up living on the other side of this stuff. You know, Claudia, you know, you've been talking about places in which these technologies are showing up, you know, in much more immediate contexts, right, where they're already being and have been adopted in processes which are already problematic, right? And they can either make them worse, or, you know, optimistically, and I think you have some of this optimism, there's a potential that they might be actually useful in making some of those things better. But that, of course, won't happen by itself or by accident. It'll happen by design. And so, but in order to do that kind of work, you know, we have to be able to bring these kinds of conversations and concerns into the conversations where we're making decisions about these technologies, and, you know, at the level of how we make them, but also the markets that we aim them at, and also how we talk about, you know, regulating or controlling them in sort of legal, political ways. I see Chris and Claudia both have hands up. So Chris, you're first up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I love the conversation. And just briefly, one thought that comes to mind among many, frankly, is, oh no, now that I'm talking, right? No. So, Claudia, you go. I gotta
Okay, cool.
remember my thought.
So I'm
Thank
going
you.
back to the Chris from Chicago's narrative around values is a big issue, but then there's also paranoia, right? So, for example, I mean, I was a big Black Mirror fan, and and you know, you look at something as the and Dila, I really think, Michael, I think the question of who we is needs to be addressed, because the more that the more I go down the rabbit hole around AI and new technologies, the more elitist I start to feel like I have become through just acquiring the information, right? And a lot of people, I can sound alarmist without even wanting to a group of people who haven't done a lot of work around AI, just because it just sounds really scary, where I've become acclimatized to it. So you take something like driverless car. If you go in social media, a lot of people, like, the government's there to take away our ability to drive, you know, they want us to be stuck. The fact that you have the cars speaking to each other and being able to map the terrain as it's driving does give insurance companies great insights about us without it even being regulated right now. And a lot of people just don't know that when they're driving their car, that someone already could know when you put in your iPhone, or you're putting that they could know how far you're driving, what your map, they can predict where you're going. There's so much information that's being shared about you that you don't even think about when you jump into your car. So the question about we had a town hall about race-based data collection, and someone in the audience from Albion, a little city or area district in Toronto, was saying, you know, when I call the police and I'm trying to give information, the dispatcher makes quick decisions about what is serious and what's not serious. So what in all this data set, what is meaning? So I put all of that, I kind of like all of that to say that we have to be, when we say, you know, we have to, are you talking about the general public, or do you talk about a group of people who actually do the work? Do you really expect a ton of people to really do the deep dive on a database to actually get to the fundamental? Because on AI, to really understand it, there is a lot of work and a lot of devotion, and most people are worried about the cost of chicken being $40.
Yeah. You know, I think this is a really, I think, important question, right? I mean, if we start from the premise that we're talking about technologies that that are very likely going to affect all of our lives, right? You know, so do we need all of us to become computer scientists, you know, in order to have views about this? I expect not. If that's our threshold problem, we've all got problems. You know, probably most of us or some of us on this call have a problem. But you know, it sort of, for me, it begs the question of, you know, like who needs to be literate about what, and how do we enable that kind of literacy, and even, you know, even if we take the view that one of the things that we want to do is make people more aware of certain things, right? You know, we can ask, like, you know, to what end and how effective that is. I'm sure everybody has seen, you know, a sign, you know, next to a camera that says, like, you know, you're being recorded right now. Okay, thank you. Doesn't change that I'm being recorded, does it? And it's like, that's not a question. And so, you know, when we want to know things, when we want others to know things, we want them to know things that are useful, that enable them to make choices about their circumstances, to change their circumstances, and so on. And I think that you know, certainly one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is, you know, what, you know, let's say that, you know, any of us, all of us, us now being the broadest sense of any population, could have a say in, you know, decision making about AI. Like, how do we even begin to think about making that work? I'm not saying that's a bad idea. To the contrary, I think it could be a good idea, but it throws up some pretty serious practical problems, right? And they're not new practical problems, some of them, even though the context in which we're confronting them may be new, and the reasons that we're confronting them may be new. You know, one of the things that I'll, you know, say and then put my mic down is, you know, again, one of the reasons that I started thinking down this road and wanted to start having these conversations is because making decisions and even understanding things that are complex is impossible to do on our own as individuals. We have to be able to think in groups and think together. How are we going to create means and opportunities for that to happen, right? You know, the learning that we want people to do, like, we can't press pause, redesign the education system and start at the bottom. Like, we don't have time for that, right? And yet, there are probably things that people need to know and understand at every age and in all kinds of, you know, ways of thinking, you know, left, right, up, and down in our social social order. How's that going to happen? Whose responsibility is this? Who's looking after it? You know, and here, you know, I think the one of the things that I've started to worry about is, you know, one of the biggest sources of information and you know, discussion of this space right now is the media, right? And most of it is not super helpful, you know, and you know, that's a business, first of all, that's got a certain kind of incentives, and journalists, even good journalists, you know, are putting a lot of their effort into telling good, interesting, and engaging stories, and that often happens at the expense of talking about things that perhaps are more important, but maybe a little boring. Chris, did you come back around to your thought or have a new one?
I did. I'm on a couple right now that are, I think, worth sharing. One is the idea of extended mind, and the idea of kind of like what are you without your iPhone now, or your phone, your telephone, or your mobile phone now, right? If you've got one, or your internet. Once you get to know Google, it's like, what are you going to do without that sort of internet support, et cetera? And so thinking about AR in very much a similar light, but then also looking at it within the arc of, most of technology, or at least modern sort of technology, Renaissance-ish sort of, literacy on kind of thing. And if you think about it, just even from point of view of language itself, right, there's been this sort of pretty consistent, at least in the West, exploitation of literacy in power structures, right? So like the Greeks, they didn't even to learn to read and write was, or to learn to, I guess it was to read and write, was, a luxury, right? And then it was with the printing press, right, that we ended up with mass literacy. If I'm not mistaken, that's the general agreement, right? And so if you think about just like literacy, like as a general function of humanity, right, and how that's operated within it, so to speak, right, and also what it's brought it, I think you can see similar sort of reflections in the AI conversation, in terms of almost perennial kind of human dynamics. And that's getting back to, I don't remember who said it, but Chris, I think it was about how we live, right? And so I think if we can start to recognize this as an extension of our own minds, right, but at the same time lacking for now an embodied consciousness, right, until we actually hook ourselves up to this thing vis-a-vis like some sort of heart monitor and yada yada, right, getting that immediate feedback that somehow influences it in a positive light towards us, just by virtue of us being a living, blood pumping human being. But right now I think that's something that's sort of in terms of, I think what we're talking about now is what do we want even the vision to be for ourselves, in a meaningful way, in a kind of workable daily sense. And I think that's what we're working out in conversations like these, frankly, even individually at first, and then over time as sort of a general understanding about where we each lie within the bigger picture, there'll be natural sort of institutionalization and formalization, right? But I think the normalization, in terms of if I had to break it down into terms of the arc of the technology acceptance and whatnot, broader sort of distribution, et cetera, then I'd have to say that normalization is going to come first, and then you're going to have more of a formalization in a sense, because in this case, it's like everything is driven by the market, et cetera. And so I'm wondering if in some ways we're all actually talking about very indirectly letting go. It's almost like we're learning how to share, if you will, our lives with this whole other sphere of development that we don't have the same connection with, obviously, as we do each other, right? And yet this sort of intelligence is going to start to, actually be making decisions behind the different layers of technology for us that are quite meaningful in terms of healthcare, in terms of finances, in terms of all manner, diplomacy, translation, et cetera. So interpretation, because people are starting to use this as actual understandings, the primary sense making, right, in different disciplines, right, at this point. And so anyway, I could go on and on. I love the conversation. Thank you for letting me be part of it.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. Hey, Kingshook, I don't mean to surprise you and put you on the spot, and I didn't plan this until just now, but I was just thinking about this webcomic thing that you posted the other day, and thinking about clearly it was something you did. It feels to me like in the path of making a move, both in the conversation and about what we understand, how we understand. If it's not too awkward, putting you on the spot, I posted a link to it in the chat, folks. is it something you talk a little bit about what you were up to and what's worth paying attention to in it?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I mean, what can I say? I mean, this group is speaking my mind in ways that many other conversations haven't. So touching, a lot of the themes that folks have talked about have been top of mind. And if I was in Chicago, maybe I would have a more balanced opinion. Here in the Bay Area, it's almost, it's a very monotone. It's go, go, go. There is no decision-making happening about AI. It's back to boom times where you don't even have to have a business case. Forget humanity, forget how we want to live, our values, our vision, and direction. It's make something, and of all the thousands of things we'll make, hopefully 2 or 3 things will succeed. So this is I'm sitting in the center of the can of worms, right, which we're unleashing to the world. So I'm very gratified and surprised to be in a community or a group like this where we're talking about a broader range of issues. So thanks for sharing the link. When folks have time, it's a 47-page, I think, webcomic, but it's a very quick read, I promise. And it's best done, I think, after the call. But I was thinking of these things we're talking about, means versus ends. The fact that the industry I've spent a lot of time in, which is design, even at its highest and best, where we have worked very hard, and folks before me, I'm looking at Chris and others, have worked very hard to get design to, the proverbial seat at the table when it comes to C-level conversations and upstream in decision-making processes, both in corporate systems and larger not-for-profit systems, etc. But in many senses, we've squandered the seat at the table, was the general feeling I have, or we are squandering it by doing the things that folks have been talking about, which is acting purely as lubricants for technology and big business, in the sense that we're removing friction instead of figuring out what are the places where complexity and effort actually add meaning to lives. So again, I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's a webcomic in that vein. It's slightly mystical and existential view of technology. I was recently attending kind of an oxymoron, a philosophy of technology class at Stanford, where it's a weird place because we're in the center of boosting technology here, but I'm really struggling with the notion of, without going into Luddite mode, right, and completely rejecting technology and living in the society where we clearly have an extended mind situation, as folks have said. How do we create that balance between things that will enhance us as humans versus things that will deplete us, right? And I'm willing to accept the state we're in right now. I'm not interested in going back to paleo times and figuring out what we are, but I think it is interesting to figure out where we are, and we have some crossroads situations here, and AI feels similar in some ways to all the technology trade-offs that we've done since the beginning of time. Someone mentioned literacy and language, and if you've in many ways, many people consider language the first technology that allowed us to remix our thoughts in ways that led to this whole boom in the first place of us figuring out how to invent things, right? And there's some amazing reading links there if anyone wants links. But AI feels similar in those ways, but also it feels different because it, in many ways, and I have full disclosure, this links to what Claudia has been talking about feelings versus thinking. So I'm in the feeling space right now, but it does feel like in many ways we've come full circle, and we're giving away the crown jewel, so to speak, when it comes to reading, writing, conversations, the things that make us human, the things that help us build on each other's ideas and improve our lives. If we're purely thinking in optimization terms of giving those things away, or giving at least partially those things away to the machine, what does it leave for us, and how do we respond to that? So sorry for speaking so long, but
no, that's great.
It might be something for folks to enjoy after the call.
Okay, thank you. See you, Chris. Claudia.
just quickly, I wanted to be clear about something that I was saying. And by the way, I really liked what you were just saying. I don't know how I was able to do it, but over a period of about a year, I was able to convince the Peel Regional Police to use co-design as a technique. So instead of using the legal realm to create a statement of principle, which is the lawyers would love it, we'll eat it up, and we'll never get anything anywhere. I wanted to go the route of co-design with the community to actually bring local and grassroots stakeholders with the police to actually create this. And so that we can get at what Chris was talking about, values, that we can actually do some of the educational piece where people get to learn about how much information they're giving away on a daily basis. Because people get really paranoid when police are using AI, but they don't realize how much they've given away to Amazon, to whatever. And so I didn't look at it as an ends to a perfect outcome. I was looking at it as a vehicle to actually get as many stakeholders and many people around the table to have these basic conversations, and not thinking that the whatever outcome that I was going to get at, or the organization was going to get at, or the communities and stakeholders, subject matter experts were going to get at, was going to be perfect, because AI is moving so fast. But the process itself was to bring the human element into the discussion, and then bring more the human element to policing, as opposed to making it more stale, and allowing the process of having a new tool to kind of fragment the human experiences is what was at top of mind. And I also wanted to reach out quickly to Chris Dalton. When you said sharing, funnily enough, I started thinking about personal colonialization. Like, is the technology going to be colonializing us, or are we sharing? And those are a very different dynamic at play. So thank you guys for listening.
Thank you, Claudia, for all that. I mean, one of the things that I want to pick up on that and sort of build on a little bit is, I think there are two kinds of participation that we are often involved in, or that we can be involved in. And you described one in the context of co-design and the work that you've been doing, which is become a kind of minority form of participation, which I'm going to, for the sake of convenience, call active participation, where something that we might think of as passive participation is the way that we participate, less thoughtfully, less consciously, perhaps, in all kinds of transactional behavior, back to the walking out of the Amazon store without, having to pay or, go through the drama of payment. And I think, the question of how we create more opportunities for active participation, it is one of the things that certainly I've been thinking a lot about, and a lot about in this context, right? Because most people, including lots of us, are stuck if we remain, sort of passive in certain ways. We're stuck in places where our participation isn't particularly effective. We're paying attention, but we're not actually engaged in work where there's an opportunity to have an effect, right? We're looking at the activity without participating in it. At least some of us are. And the idea, that participation can be broadened in the way that you're describing, Claudia, right? I mean, here is a thing with effects on people's lives, policing, in which, this is a pretty new thing for us to think that, ordinary people at various different levels of the society ought to get to, or could get to, participate in thinking about, talking about, helping each other understand about the reality that they're trying to make decisions about. And I think this is like I just don't see how we are going to be able to make intelligent decisions without becoming actively participants in all kinds of ways, right? Now, we can't be that way all the time, everywhere, right? But I think the kinds of activity that you're describing is becoming more possible, for a variety of reasons, right? Ideas about processes of design, for example, have been moving around into places where they can be put to use in places that need them, right? And one of the things that a lot of these folks on the call have in common is some education in practice, in investment in knowledge, practice, methods of design. And a lot of the folks on this call have been involved in various ways, as I have, in efforts to sort of create an enlargement of access and visibility to those tools and methods for uses that in many cases, like, we can't imagine and don't need to, right? But they create sources of power and agency for people who don't have equal access to tools that make participation have impact. And I think like the fact that, Claudia, you're doing work that really literally is at the intersection of everything we've been talking about in the last couple of conversations is really optimistic to me, and certainly something that I would like to see spreading around, and to the extent to which people on this call play in spaces or might be able to play in spaces in which we can further spread that kind of stuff around. I think that's really exciting, and certainly the kind of stuff that makes me feel optimistic. And I want to feel optimistic. I mean, I want it not only just because it feels better than the alternative, but also because I'm not, a complete cynic about technology, especially technology that has the potential to help us know, see, and understand more than we do and can do on our own. I think that's potentially incredibly powerful, and could be put to really powerful purposes. So. We've got about 7 minutes, so it's going to be starting to land the plane time. So let me begin by saying, anybody who's been sitting on a thought, or just finally has a better idea to shame all of us with our lame ideas, no pressure. There's an opportunity in time remaining. Anyone?
I'll just take the time to say thank you and take my leave. I really appreciate this, and I'd love to be part of any other conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Cheers, guys.
Okay. Well, then it's a peaceful place maybe to leave, and give people a little bit of time back. But again, thanks for coming. Thanks for participating. One thing that I will say to the group that remains, and I will spread out in the email to the folks, everyone who turned up, and those who were unable to turn up. One of the things that I want to start doing in future seminars is to spread out the management of the conversation, which is not to say that the work per se, but want to invite people who want to bring something to the conversation. Please, if you've got thoughts about ways to use this time that might not occur to me, reach out. If there's something that you think this group of people, and this kind of conversation could be a good place to explore further, looking for that kind of input. I'm happy to keep being sort of the motive force and the door opener here, but I also want to be mindful of not monopolizing the conversation with the things that are in my head. So please make of that invitation what you will. Anything, and one last thing, one of the things that I'm going to be trying to do on a regular basis is share these Google Docs. One of the things that for me is valuable, but can be valuable to us all insofar as we have access to them, is things that you may add to those documents, whether they're questions, references, thoughts. Again, it gives us a nice way to build on things that outside the confines of the time that we've been spending here. No obligation, obviously, on that, but again, an invitation. Any further thoughts on any of that? By all means, reach out by whatever channels are easiest for you, and certainly take that on. But great to see you all, and thanks for another great conversation.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Michael.
everyone.
Great to see everybody.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
all. I can't wait for you to open a door for me again.
Sure, I'll open the door for you anytime, Rick.
I'll see you later.
All right, then. Ciao.